An 8-year-old girl walks into a courtroom filled with people who've already made up their minds about her father. But what she says next, it changes everything. In a small, tight-knit town in Alabama, James Carter, a hardworking black man and single father, found himself at the center of a storm he didn't see coming. James was known in the community for his quiet demeanor and dedication to his 8-year-old daughter, Mia. He worked 2 jobs, one as a mechanic during the day and another as a night security guard, just to make ends meet and give Mia a chance at a better life. But none of that mattered when he was accused of a crime he didn't commit. The accusation came out of nowhere. A local store had been robbed, and despite no solid evidence linking him to the scene, James was arrested. The town, already divided by racial tensions, quickly turned against him. Whispers spread like wildfire. He fits the description. You know how they are. The trial was set, and the courtroom was packed, not with people seeking justice, but with those who had already made up their minds. The prosecution's case was weak. No fingerprints, no witnesses placing James at the scene, and no stolen goods found in his possession. But the real problem wasn't the lack of evidence, it was the bias in the room. The jury, all white, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The prosecutor's tone was dismissive, almost mocking, as if the verdict was a foregone conclusion. Even the judge seemed impatient, rushing through the proceedings. James sat quietly, his heart heavy. He knew the odds were stacked against him. But what hurt the most wasn't the possibility of losing his freedom. It was the thought of leaving Mia behind. She was his world, and he had promised to always be there for her. Mia, though just 8 years old, understood more than anyone gave her credit for. She had seen the way people looked at her dad, heard the whispers at school, and felt the weight of the town's prejudice. When she learned her father was on trial, she begged to be in the courtroom. Against all advice, James agreed. He knew Mia had something to say, and he trusted her voice more than anyone else's. The stage was set. A black man fighting for his freedom in a system that seemed designed to fail him, and a little girl who refused to let her father become another statistic. The real challenge wasn't just proving James' innocence, it was breaking through the walls of bias and hate that had already been built. And Mia? She was about to do something no one expected. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with judgment. James sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly, trying to steady his nerves. Mia, small but determined, sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on her father. She wasn't supposed to speak, after all. What could an 8-year-old possibly say that would matter in a court of law? But Mia had other plans. As the trial dragged on, it became clear that this wasn't about evidence or facts. The prosecution's case was built on assumptions and stereotypes. They painted James as a likely suspect, using coded language that everyone in the room understood. The defense attorney fought back, pointing out the lack of concrete proof, but it felt like shouting into a void. The jury's faces were unreadable, but their body language said enough. Crossed arms, narrowed eyes, and occasional glances at James that felt more like accusations than curiosity. Mia had been listening carefully, her young mind piecing together the unfairness of it all. She remembered the nights her dad came home exhausted, his hands stained with grease from fixing cars all day. She remembered how he'd sit with her at the kitchen table, helping her with homework even when he could barely keep his eyes open. She remembered his words, no matter what happens, always stand up for what's right. Now, watching him being treated like a criminal for no reason, she knew she had to do something. When the defense rested its case, Mia stood up. Her small voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Your Honor," she said, her words shaky but clear. "Can I say something?" The judge hesitated, glancing at the attorneys. The prosecutor objected, but the defense attorney saw the determination in Mia's eyes and urged the judge to let her speak. The room fell silent as Mia walked to the front. She didn't have notes or a prepared speech, just the truth. She looked at the jury, then at the judge, and finally at her father. "My dad is the best person I know," she began. "He works so hard for me, and he always tells me to be kind, even when people aren't kind to us." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, "If you take him away, you're not just punishing him. You're punishing me too, and that's not fair." For the first time, the courtroom felt different. The tension shifted, replaced by an uneasy silence. Maya's words weren't just a defense of her father. They were a mirror held up to everyone in the room, forcing them to see the human cost of their prejudice. The jury exchanged glances, their earlier certainty wavering. Even the judge seemed moved, his stern expression softening. Maya's moment wasn't just about proving her father's innocence. It was about exposing the deeper problem, a system that too often judges people based on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. And in that moment, she became the voice of truth in a room that desperately needed to hear it. The courtroom was dead silent as Mia stepped forward. All eyes were on her, this tiny 8-year-old girl with pigtails and a dress that seemed too big for her small frame. She clutched the edges of the wooden podium, her knuckles white, but her voice didn't waver. "My name is Mia Carter," she began, "and that's my dad over there." She pointed to James, who sat frozen, tears welling in his eyes. Mia didn't talk about the crime or the evidence. She didn't need to. Instead, she told the courtroom about her father, the man who taught her how to ride a bike, who stayed up late helping her with math problems, and who always made sure she had breakfast, even on the mornings he had to leave for work before the sun came up. "He's not perfect," she said, "but he's my dad, and he's the best person I know." Then she turned to the jury, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You don't know him like I do. You don't know how he sings to me when I'm scared at night, or how he saves money just so I can go on school trips. You don't know how much he loves me." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "If you take him away, you're not just punishing him. You're punishing me too, and that's not fair." The impact of her words was immediate. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The jury, once stone-faced, now exchanged uneasy glances. One juror, a middle-aged woman, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Even the judge, who had seemed so stern moments earlier, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but his posture less rigid. For James, it was like watching a dam break. He had tried so hard to stay strong, to believe in the system, but hearing his daughter defend him with such raw honesty shattered him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as he cried silently. Mia wasn't finished. "I don't know why people don't like my dad," she said, her voice trembling now. "Is it because of his skin? Because he's black? That's not fair either. My dad always tells me that what's inside matters more than what's outside. So why can't you see that?" The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Maya's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She had done what no lawyer or witness could. She had humanized James in a way that made it impossible to see him as just another defendant. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't just deciding Jame's fate, it was confronting its own biases. And Mia, with her courage and honesty, had turned the tide. If this story hit you as hard as it hit me, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, they deserve to be heard.